Hey everyone, this is Stacey Spivey with Channel 7 News, and I'm joined by Senator Tom Cotton in the Channel 7 podcast room to talk about all things going on right now with the government shutdown, as well as other things that many of you have been inquiring about on our website and our social media pages. First off, thank you so much, Senator Cotton, for being here this morning.
Stacey, good to be with you.
Yes, thank you. Let's just first talk about what is the atmosphere like in D.C. right now?
Well, it's frustrating. We're trying to do the people's business, but now for more than a month, Chuck Schumer and the Democrats have held the government hostage to their frankly absurd demands. They want $1.5 trillion of new spending. They want to finance health care for illegal aliens with Arkansas tax dollars. They want to cut a $50 billion support fund for rural hospitals, like the hospitals we have all across the state of Arkansas. We're willing to have those negotiations and those debates. We think we'll probably win them, but not under the hostage taking that Chuck Schumer and the Democrats have started. Now, I do think the Democrats are maybe starting to come to their senses. The hardships are beginning to pile up. You've seen across the nation, like here in Arkansas, that food stamp benefits are running out. We have almost 250,000 Arkansans on food stamps. Federal employees have now missed a second paycheck. Our troops, fortunately, look like they're going to be paid this time around. The Department of Defense was able to find some contingency funds to support those paychecks. But none of this should be necessary. We should just fund the government, and then we can talk about anything else that the Democrats want to discuss. But I do think that perhaps this week, after you get past the elections in Virginia and New Jersey, the Democrats may be willing to provide the votes necessary to fund the government. Frankly, some of them said to us last week that they didn't want to open it up before those elections because they were afraid it might depress Democratic turnout, to give you a sense of the state of affairs in the Democratic Party. But I am hopeful that this week that we can open the government back up and we can get on to doing the people's business.
Hearing from many Arkansans, and I know I'm from Saline County, there are a lot of people that are struggling with food insecurity. We're the number one, state in the nation when it comes to that. So people are struggling right now. They're worried about their next meal. What would you have to say to those people?
I feel very badly for anyone who's in that situation. I know that we have a lot of Arkansans not just using the food stamp program, but the Women, Infants, and Children's Nutrition Program. That free or reduced school meals could be at risk if the shutdown continues as well. I heard from teachers, for instance, in Johnson County just a few days ago who are worried about their students. All of this can be avoided if the Democrats simply open the government back up. We're now a month into the shutdown. The original length of this bill was only 7 weeks long, so we'll probably extend it a bit further, maybe into the new year, so we can hopefully pass the full year funding bills that prevent this from happening again, and we don't find ourselves back in this situation in just a few weeks. But the simplest way to address everyone's concerns, to eliminate these hardships, is for the Democrats to simply vote to open the government, as frankly they did 13 times when Chuck Schumer was the leader of the U.S. Senate.
And that was going to be my next question leading into the future. What can we do to prevent this from happening again? I know a lot of people are worried about their healthcare premiums going up, and they're agreeing that Democrats, are in the right wanting to have those cuts or those credits rather necessary to keep those premiums down.
Yeah. Well, the problem with Obamacare is not that the Biden era COVID bonuses are expiring. The problem is that Obamacare has been very unaffordable health care from the very beginning. Ironically, since its official title is the Affordable Care Act, it's made health care unaffordable for so many Americans. Not only people who are on the Obamacare exchanges here in Arkansas, but people who get insurance, for instance, to their employers by imposing mandates that people don't always need. Your health care needs, for instance, are very different if you're a young man or woman in your 20s versus a family in their 40s versus empty nesters in their 60s. And Arkansans should be able to make those choices for themselves. So the challenge of these Obamacare premiums going up is not really related to the Biden COVID bonuses. It's the fact that Obamacare does not provide quality health insurance that fits you and your family's needs while making it much more expensive for everyone. But again, these are debates that we can have, as President Trump said just this weekend, once the government is opened back up.
Yeah, what is the solution here? Is it waiting and working this out at a later time?
Well, as we've said now for a month, we're not going to allow the Democrats to demand $1.5 trillion of new spending and health care financed by tax dollars for illegal aliens or eliminating support for our rural hospitals just to fund the government for 7 weeks. And now it would just be 3 weeks if we don't change the expiration date of the bill that's on the Senate floor right now. Again, we can have all these debates. We can debate healthcare. We can debate immigration. I think we have a lot of solutions to both of those challenges, but we can't do it under the threat of a government shutdown. All that's going to do is encourage the Democrats, the next time government funding is in question, to hold out for even more extreme demands. And I don't think that's what the people of Arkansas want.
Us and leading into the people of Arkansas, we know that we are a farming state. There's been a lot of talk about soybeans. There's been a lot of talk about Argentina beef, getting, those exports from other countries. I guess first let's talk about the soybeans. I know that there's been some progress made. What would you like to see happen, though?
Well, it's been a very tough time for our farmers in Arkansas and across the country. Soybeans have been hit particularly hard because of market conditions. It's a combination of prices for our commodities being too low and input costs being too high, from seed to fertilizer to diesel to machinery and equipment. A lot of that goes back to the inflation of the Biden era. One thing that we've done in the big beautiful bill is to provide to supply side incentives like tax cuts that are permanent, that help our farmers invest in new equipment if they need it, that help give stability to long-term planning, and hopefully that'll help control costs on the input side. On the price side, our farmers have been targeted unfairly by communist China. Now, President Trump was just in Seoul meeting with the Chinese dictator Xi Jinping, who said they would start soybean purchases again. That's a welcome development. It's not a solution by itself, because many of our farmers have already booked their crops at relatively low prices. And for the next 3 years, the Chinese made a commitment only to buy it at the same levels they were in recent years, which is not growth, it's just static levels. And that's assuming they honor their end of the deal, which I certainly don't. I know President Trump doesn't either, that he holds Ronald Reagan's old view of dealing with the communist powers, which is to trust but verify. Another thing that we've done in the big beautiful bill is pass a new farm bill, what I like to call the Bozeman Farm Bill, because John Bozeman is the chair of the Agriculture Committee, and he helped author it, and I was pleased to support it. Again, that's not a short-term solution, though, because it doesn't really kick in until this time next year. So a short-term solution the president has discussed, which I would support as well, is using some of the extra revenue that has come in from tariffs this year to provide our farming families the support they need to bridge from this growing season to next growing season, when hopefully some of these trade negotiations and the new Bozeman Farm Bill will provide them a much higher floor and a much stronger safety net. He hasn't been able to move forward on that proposal because of the government shutdown again, and we're now going into more than a month of the government shutdown, when the president may have been able to use that excess tariff revenue to provide some bridge funding for our farming families that he hasn't been able to do yet because of the shutdown. So if we end the shutdown and we allow the Department of Agriculture to get on with its business, hopefully that means that farming families across Arkansas can have a bit of certainty as they're trying to book their crops and make sure that they can finance their operations and put a new crop in the ground next year.
And you grew up on a farm. You know how tough it is. What is your message for farmers right now as they're in this kind of waiting period? Because I know I grew up with a lot of friends that their families own farms, and there's just this instability right now and this uncertainty of the future, and it's terrifying for a lot of them.
Very much so. I was just with a multi-generation farming family in Conway County a few days ago, and we talked about our priorities, which is making sure that they can put a crop in the ground in 2026, which I believe will be their 76th year planting on that farm.
Wow.
But the ultimate priority is not the 76th year of planting, it's the 100th year or the 125th year, to make sure that the next generation and the grandkids generation can stay on the land that their family has farmed for so long. I understand how important that our family's attachment is to those farms. We have century farms in my family as well. I can promise them that President Trump keeps them close to his heart and on the front of his mind. You can look at his statements going into his summit with Xi Jinping, and what he came out of there with, that was a top priority. There were a lot of issues to address with China that didn't come up, but one of the very first things and most important things that came up was what was happening to our farmers here in the United States, who have been unfairly targeted by communist China. And just like President Trump has them, is working for them every single day, Senator Bozeman and I are doing the same thing in Washington. As soon as this shutdown ends, we're going to be working closely with the White House and the Department of Agriculture to try to give those family farmers the assurances they need that they're going to be able to get through this winter and be able to plant a new crop next year. And then, like I said, hopefully with new trade deals coming online and the Bozeman Farm Bill coming online, 2026 and beyond will be much more promising.
I know that cattle farmers are also a little worried as well. I was reading something about with Argentina beef and all the talks about, taking or getting beef from there. But the concern was the safety aspect. People are worried about that. And then also farmers are worried because they're like, we have our cattle here. What do you want to say about that?
Well, as you said, I grew up with a cow-calf production operation. My parents still operate it in Yell County. So suffice to say, I hear from cattlemen pretty regularly on this, and we certainly heard from cattlemen across the state, as many of my colleagues in big beef states heard from their cattlemen too. I think the proposal bringing more Argentine beef is ill-advised. Not only does it have a detrimental effect on the price of cattle, but also it raises some of the safety issues that you mentioned, Stacy. And it probably won't do much to bring down the price of beef at the butcher counter in your grocery store. And I understand that a lot of Arkansans are struggling with that. But I think we can address the price of beef for Arkansas consumers without introducing these safety concerns or hurting the livelihoods of cattle ranchers who have had a good year, but frankly, who have had several bad years before this. Some of the steps we can take, for instance, are making sure that we're opening federal lands to grazing. That's not a big issue here in Arkansas, but it's a major issue in the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain states where a lot of our beef does come from. We can make regulations on independent packers a little bit less onerous. The Biden administration, not surprisingly, increased regulations quite a bit to provide more avenues for our cattlemen to take their beef to market. These are steps that we can take without what I believe is the ill-advised step of importing more Argentine beef that will hurt our cattlemen without, I don't think, doing much to noticeably bring down the price of beef at the grocery store.
Yeah, prices are something that everyone's talking about right now. We'll get back to that in just a second. I do want to talk about the drug boat strikes because that is also on the forefront of a lot of Americans' minds right now. What are your thoughts on what's happening? I know that you're in the Central Intelligence Committee. Do you think that this is how it should be going? Do you think that it's an issue or it violates international law? What are your thoughts?
Our military has a lot of important roles to defend our nation and help preserve global stability and security, which serves Arkansans' interests. There's few responsibilities of our military greater than protecting our own homeland. And these drug boats in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific are clearly destined to reach the United States and to flood our streets with deadly drugs, to include fentanyl, which has killed thousands of Arkansans in recent years. I have confidence that all of these strikes are well-founded. As you mentioned, I'm the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. In that role, I occasionally meet with the other senior leaders of the Congress and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. It's fair to say that multiple sources of intelligence have pinpointed these boats as trafficking drugs in large quantities destined for the United States. I would also just point out to all Arkansans, based on their common sense, I think it's fair to say that these are not fishermen or refugees, because if it was, I suspect CNN International would be on the ground and already have found their families in talking to them. So they can be confident, as I am, that these drug boats are loaded with drugs. They're destined for the United States. In most cases, they're working through cartels in northern South Africa, specifically Venezuela, South America, specifically Venezuela, that are often tied to Nicolas Maduro's socialist regime in Venezuela. That President Trump made it clear during the campaign, and he's keeping that promise, that he's going to protect our country from these drug traffickers, and that's exactly what he's doing, and I support it.
My last question for you would just be, it seems like the atmosphere as of late has just been kind of heavy. I think a lot of Americans and Arkansans specifically that I've spoken with and done stories with, people are just, they're scared, they're anxious, they're worried about their next meal, they're worried about healthcare, they're worried about a lot of things. As a leader, what is your message to the people of Arkansas to help maybe calm those fears and anxieties? What are you doing to help the people of our state?
Well, I think we've gradually started turning around things from what was a pretty tough 4 years under Joe Biden, when every family was struggling so badly with record inflation. Again, that doesn't get turned around overnight, But just in these first 9 or 10 months, with President Trump back in the White House and Republicans in charge of the Congress, we've passed major landmark legislation that's going to address many Arkansans' concerns. As we talked about earlier, the big beautiful bill, like the 2017 tax cut bill, has record high tax cuts. It's going to lock those tax rates in permanently for families. It's going to benefit the vast majority of Arkansans who don't itemize their taxes by giving them a higher standard deduction, and by increasing the income levels at which tax rates are paid, by allowing them to write off the charitable contributions they make to their church or to their local food bank or what have you. It's going to help businesses across the state of Arkansas by allowing them to immediately depreciate new capital investments, which almost always means new equipment, new technology that leads to higher wages in the long run. So I think our economy is turning the corner. It's going to continue to get stronger. That bill also is going to address the high price of energy in this country by helping unlock more energy across our country, whether it's your electricity bill or at the gas pump, as Arkansans have already seen prices beginning to come down. It has a lot of important measures that's going to address safety in our streets, for instance, by finishing the wall on our southern border or hiring more immigration enforcement officers who are going to protect our streets across the state from the kind of drug traffickers we were just talking about, if they do survive the boat strikes in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific and get into our country. So I think that things are going to begin getting better. I think they're already better than they were over the last 4 years. But I think better days are ahead of us.
That's encouraging to hear. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you would want to touch on or talk about today?
I think that's all good. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator Cotton, for being here with us this morning.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stacey.